This episode is sponsored by Sternglass and their new Marion dive watch. Sternglass is celebrating 8 years with the launch of its second dedicated dive watch, this time with an internal rotating bezel and colorful textured dials. Visit sternglass.com to explore various combinations and receive a free tropic-style rubber strap with your purchase.
Hello and welcome to the Worn and Wound podcast. My name is Zach Kazan. I'm the managing editor at Worn and Wound. I'm joined today by head of content at Worn and Wound, Kat Shoulders. Kat, how's it going?
Great.
Thanks for glad to have you on.
Sorry, that was really short, wasn't it?
No, it was.
I'm
well,
so
listen,
glad to be here.
I asked a question. You answered it. That's all I can really expect. I think we're both still kind of honestly in like a post wind up sort of like just like get me to the end of my like crazy schedule day sort of mentality. At least I am. But we've got a fun show today. We're joined today by Worn and Wound contributor and first time Worn and Wound podcast guest. It's long overdue. Meg Tosi. Meg, how's it going?
I'm good. How are you guys?
Doing well. I'm glad we were finally able to figure out a time to get you on the podcast. You've written a number of really great pieces for us. And I think you have a really interesting like perspective and background. And I've been dying to talk to you on the podcast. So thank you so much for
thank you. Yeah.
Time.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. Let's start off with some wrist checks before we get into the meat of the discussion. Meg, what are you wearing today?
So I went with the classic. I'm wearing my Hamilton Khaki Field Murph 38 millimeter. And this is on the Uncle Straps Senator bracelet.
Oh, nice.
Very nice.
That's cool.
Nice. I see you posting that one a lot. That's kind of like
this is my baby. Yeah, this is my favorite. I don't like to play favorites, but this for sure is the favorite.
Yeah, it's pretty good. Kat, how about you? What are you wearing?
I am wearing the new to me Fears Collective. This is the 39.5 Onyx dial Redcliffe that Fears collaborated obviously with Collective with. I picked this up at the Wind Up Watch Fair after I said I wasn't going to buy any watches. Just never works out.
Yeah, I feel like if you tell yourself you're not going to buy something, that kind of like has an inverse effect and makes you more like.
Well, here's the thing. It was the last one. And I'm just like,
so I had to.
It's calling my name, which honestly is so cool.
Of those Onyx dials that they made.
They only did 20, so I have one of the 20 that they did. My first stone dial I've ever had, which I mean I think is really cool. The black is so dark and deep, and it's a really really cool watch. It sort of verges on being like kind of dressy, but then really sporty too. And I don't have the bracelet for it, but I just reached out to their team today because I think I do want to wear it on bracelet too. I think it looks really cool and adds to that sportiness of it. But I've got it on a deluxe, their new canvas strap that they sent me, which is really cool. This is not an ad or anything. They just sent me one of these to try out, and they just added a bunch of new straps to their site. And I saw this green canvas strap, and it's kind of rubberized, so it's waterproof too. And it's awesome. Yeah, Deluxe does a great job with their straps, and also like their new like mechanism for what do you call it?
It's like a spring-loaded deployant, right?
Yeah, spring-loaded. That's what it's called.
Yeah.
Which is very nice to have. It makes the watch wear a little closer to your wrist, I find, too, which is cool.
Yeah, that's a very cool piece. You have a bunch of Fears.
I have a bunch of Fears. Yeah, this is my third, and I have a fourth on the way. That's custom, and it's going to be really cool. I'm excited about.
Very excited. That's very cool. It's nice to have like a little sub collection of a brand that you really like and resonates with you. Very cool. Congratulations on the recent pickup.
Thank you. What are you wearing today?
I'm wearing my Citizen Ciosa Small Seconds, which I'll flash up on the screen.
Yeah.
I wrote about this watch recently. This is like my first integrated bracelet sports watch. I've never really had like a taste for integrated bracelet. That's hard to say. Integrated bracelet sports watches. I've never really had a taste for them in the past. But this watch I saw actually at the Chicago Wind Up Watch Fair earlier this year, and I really like the color of the dial, and I thought like this might be a fun way to sort of like get into experience like integrated bracelet sports watches at like a price point that won't like hurt me too much if I don't like it, because this watch is like $600 or something like that, which is like, not like the cheapest cheap watch, but like, I'm not gonna, it was like kind of in that impulse buy like territory for me at the time. So yeah, I really enjoy it. It's it's fun. I don't know that like I have any like strong takes on like integrated bracelet sports watches, like beyond the, like this one is nice. It doesn't like make me like lust for a Royal Oak or a Nautilus or anything. But like this watch is cool. It's fun.
It's very nice. I got to go hands on with the 3 colorways that they did. Like there's like a green, gold dial, and they did a gray, like kind of a charcoal gray dial too. And I think for the price point, which is under $700, they're great. They're a great buy, and I think they feel really good in the hand, and the texture is beautifully done. And I think for those folks that like maybe want something that feels a little Grand Seiko in nature without having to spend that kind of cash, like I think to me it's like that's the option to go to. And I think Citizen in general is doing some really cool things with dials at a really great price point. But I don't know how I feel actually about integrated bracelets yet either, because I say I like them and then I like the option to change straps a lot.
Yeah, changing straps is pretty important. Meg, do you have any thoughts on? Have you ever owned an integrated bracelet sports watch at any point?
No, I haven't. I think the closest thing was I reviewed the 12 from Christopher Ward. That was actually my first review for Wonderland. And I liked it. It's tough to put my finger on why. They are tough to size, I think, so that can be tricky. If you don't get the right fit, I think it kind of taints the experience of having an integrated bracelet watch. But in general, I think they're cool to look at for sure. I don't know if I gravitate towards that style kind of on its own, but they were fun.
That's a really good point about the sizing. Like the watch is so dependent on the bracelet, like draping a certain way. Like you really have to nail down the size. And, as I think we've probably all experienced, like we've probably all come across a bracelet at one point or another that just like, no matter how you configure it, like it just doesn't fit right. So that's really important. I'm lucky. This watch kind of just like fits perfectly with a couple of links removed on my wrist. But that's so important on any integrated bracelet sports watch.
And they do straps actually for those too. So if you don't like the bracelet, like they do like the kind of leather straps that are cool.
Yeah, this is sort of like a pseudo integrated bracelet sports watch, I guess you'd call it, because you can put a strap on it, but it's an integrated strap at that. So
definitely.
Yeah. All right. So Meg, let's start at the start. Like, how did you? At
the beginning. Yeah. Let's start from the beginning.
Yep.
Tell us we did a podcast recently on our like watch origin stories. So like maybe like tell us how you how you got into the hobby, and what like watches sort of like drew you in initially into the space.
Yeah, so I started out like a lot of people, I think. I wore an Apple Watch for a long time. I started with Fitbit, actually. Then I switched to Apple Watch. This was about 3 years ago. And as kind of a side hobby, I'm a competitive Irish dancer. And so I loved the Apple Watch because it was really easy to like change my music and stuff when I was training. And I kind of started to rely on it a little bit, I think. And I didn't love that I was always accessible with the texts. I think having all the stats, I'm kind of someone that like trends towards anxiety a little bit. And so like having all those stats, like heart rate, the steps and everything at my disposal was not really good for me. So I was used to something on the wrist, but I kind of wanted something else. And I had a friend at the time who was getting back into watches. So he'd been a collector in the past, kind of fell out of it and then was getting back into it. And I remember he would just talk to me about wristwatches. And I was like, I don't get it. Like this is kind of weird. Like what it doesn't read your text out loud to you. Like, what's the point of that? And he was really smart. So at the time I was in grad school and I was studying military history, and he's like, yeah, Meg, there really is a lot of overlap between watches and the military. And so I started to do some of my own research, and I found that to be true. And I think that's what initially kind of pulled me in, was like these watches have such a robust history in how it relates to the military. And then up until recently, I was also working at a school in Colorado. I was working with veterans, helping them use their GI Bill benefits. And a lot of them were really into watches. And they're like, oh yeah, I brought this G-Shock on deployment, like to Afghanistan. And I kind of found out these watches have stories.
Yeah.
And I think I've always been someone that is drawn to the origin of things. And I want to kind of figure out, like, what is this thing about? And so that kind of got me into it. And then I think just meeting these incredible people within the community, that's kind of kept me here, where I'm like, I've had these really incredible experiences. I've like traveled to these cool places. I get these cool shots, like these cool wrist checks. Yeah. And so I think that for me, it's now kind of branched out from just the history side of it, where I'm like, now it's kind of the adventure side of it, where I am able to experience this and like bring it along with me and kind of put these memories into this object and have that for myself. So
totally. I totally get that.
Yeah.
That's very cool. So I definitely want to ask you more about like the military history piece and how that specifically sort of like led you down this path. But Kat, something we've heard a lot, I think, and is this idea of like a smartwatch kind of like bridging the gap into like traditional watchmaking for a lot of people. I feel like this has come up on the podcast before, and
myself included.
Like,
totally.
So like that's a really fascinating thing for me. And honestly, like Meg, I was the same way. I bought an Apple Watch, like I think it was a first or second generation Apple Watch, and I had been into like mechanical watches for a long time at that point. So I was just very curious, and I didn't like having the notifications like constantly vibrating against my wrist. Like that just felt like, to me, as someone who was used to a traditional watch, is like kind of invasive and just not appealing in any way, shape, or form. And I was way too lazy and too much of a Luddite at that point to like play with the settings to like.
Yeah, I feel the exact same. I'm kind of, as a rule, I'm very anti-tech. I think that's why I've like always studied history. I'm like, there's no need to get into the technical aspects of anything. But yeah, with the Apple Watch, I'm like I'm always accessible, and that doesn't feel great. And also it seemed like every single person had one. Yeah. And I'm like, this is telling me like, I'm able to access the internet on this. I'm learning about the world through this, but like no one is getting to know me or my style or what's important to me, because I'm just one of the many, like everyone has an Apple Watch at this point, or a Fitbit.
Yeah.
And so with mechanical watches, I was like, this is cool. And I started to have conversations with people that also had mechanical watches. And it just led to this instant connection where you're like, oh, why did you choose that? And everyone had a story behind it. It wasn't just like, oh, well, I can get my email on this. So it was
that's a great point.
Choice.
That's a great point. Cause everyone is wearing usually an Apple Watch or some sort of smartwatch in general, but like you can really tell kind of who a person is by the watch they're wearing. And there, like you said, there's so many stories behind it. And I always find it fascinating, especially coming out of shows like Wind Up and looking around at people's wrists and people wearing watches I would have never guessed they would like pick. And I just find it really fascinating, and it sparks conversation. But yeah, an Apple Watch is never going to spark a conversation ever. Like it's just a thing. It's might as well be your phone, honestly.
Right. Yeah.
Sometimes I think about how there's like this whole generation of people who are going to look back on like their wedding photos and like important, like, family moments and photographs and things. And they're just going to see like these Apple Watches everywhere. Yeah. And that's going to be so boring. Like to like, it doesn't tell you, like, to your point, it doesn't tell you anything about their style or personality or anything. It's just like everyone's kind of wearing a uniform at these, these milestone events. And that just seems kind of sad.
Also, don't wear an Apple Watch for your wedding, please. If you're listening.
Yeah. Don't.
Yeah. Not even a hot take. That's just the truth. Don't do
it. We don't often give sartorial advice here, but
no joke. As we started talking about Apple Watches, I realized that I'm literally digging in my pocket right now. I put my dead Apple Watch in my pocket this morning because I was like, oh, it needs to charge. I do wear it when I work out, so like it needs to charge. But this is also the crappy thing about these things is that they last for a few days and then they're dead. So I'm like walking around all day with this in my. I'm going to put it on my desk now, so I'm reminded of it. But they're just paperweights at the end of the day. Like they die.
Yeah. I think
not to mention like planned obsolescence, like too. Like
I was just going to say that. Yeah, it's not going to last forever. And I think just to your previous point about like the wedding photos, you're not passing down an Apple Watch to your children.
Yeah.
No.
At least I hope not. But with a mechanical watch, like it just means so much more. And there's nothing wrong with a fitness tracker or like an Apple Watch. I also still wear it to work out, but I think it adds a little bit of depth to someone's character, I think, when you're able to talk to them about like this very intentional choice they made. And then their plans for like, okay, like, are you giving this to your children? Or like, do you take this watch on these trips to Europe or Africa? And I think that it just makes for better conversations.
Yeah, for sure. So one of those, conversations that might come up, I would imagine, is a watch used with, for like a military purpose, an issued watch. And this is a connection that you made, because of an interest you have in military history and academic pursuit. Was there a particular, like story of a military watch that you like really gravitated to early on, or do you have like a favorite, kind of like example of a military watch kind of like becoming important in the watch collecting community?
Yeah, so nothing specifically. I think one of the things, and this is kind of why I'm such a fan of Hamilton watches and just their history with the US military, is that they diverted commercial production in World War II to support the war effort. And I think it was really interesting where I was like, oh, I could own a Hamilton today. And it kind of harkens back to this legacy of like forgoing for years revenue because they were just supplying these watches to the US military. And I think there was also something interesting to me about, obviously there was like slight iterations and stuff, but for the most part, these watches that were owned by these service members looked the same, regardless of who was producing them. And so that to me, I think is just interesting from a military perspective, like having everyone kind of have the same thing, but it's still imbued with these experiences and these memories. And it was something that they took with them after the war and passed down to grandchildren and things like that.
Their uniforms. Like my grandfather, he passed several years back, and us grandkids got like all of his old fatigues and like his old military jackets, as well as like I have a camera that he bought while he was stationed in Germany. And I'm sure that there may have been a watch somewhere along the way that got lost, but it's kind of part of that. And it's part of the legacy of these people that serve. And I love that aspect too. And Hamilton's got so much history, especially with the military. But yeah, what made you dig down that specific rabbit hole? Was it just the history in general? Like you said, you're sort of a history buff.
Yeah. So I think it for sure is the history buff in me. But also just this desire to preserve these stories. Yeah. And so I think it was interesting, like these articles that I was reading where I'm like, oh yeah, these memories live on and someone is writing about them. And, I think that's kind of what got me into military history, was like to be able to tell these stories and like work with, veterans and not let those memories die in a sense. And so I think just that could be exemplified in this little object just kind of blew my mind. Where I'm like, like I can own these too. Obviously I'm not fighting a world war. But
yet.
Oh gosh. Knock on wood.
Elections next week, y'all.
Hopefully I will never have to use my watch in a military context, but but I know they're reliable if I have to, so I think that's interesting to me as well. And there's like this weird kind of part of me that I'm like, it almost feels like playing dress up a little bit, where I'm like, I mean, these watches, if you were in the trenches, like having to make sure you're making decisions at the same time as everyone else, that's like real stakes. But yeah, we can still have this. And it's like, my life is not at stake if I'm a couple minutes late or whatever. But I think it's just kind of this homage to this, thing bigger than I am.
Yeah, totally.
It's, it speaks to something we talk about all the time, is that there are so many different ways to get into the watch world, whether obviously you came to it through history, and I think you've found, other things appealing about, about the wider watch world, but that's how you come to it. Some people come to it from a design perspective or an interest in mechanical things. And that's like that to me, the idea that you can come to watches from so many different ways, like that is the thing that I love about watches, is that there's so many different like avenues into it, whether it's like art or history or design, whatever. It's this one place where all these things intersect. I really can't think of another like part of our lives that like has so many different like intersecting points.
Right. Yeah. I think what I found to be true in the watch world is watches usually are not the end thing for a lot of people. I think it's like, this is something that accompanies you to the end thing. And I think that is really interesting. So you're right. It's like there are people that are really into design and they can appreciate a beautiful watch, or a really well-crafted watch. But yeah, so I think that's interesting to me that there is such diversity.
Yeah. I think it might be the end thing for me. I think that might be.
Zach's like,
well, it's the end thing for Zach, but yeah. Yeah.
I'm one of those weirdos. That's the end thing.
But I feel like watch people tend to be so multi-hobbied too. So it's like, even if that is the end thing, like there are watch people into wine, into coffee. Like we just like to have these things that show the world who we are. And so I found that watch people are the most interesting people that I've ever talked with, even if it's 100%. Not a conversation about watches.
Just like intellectual curiosity is something that's like so important, I think, like to this hobby and to kind of like getting the most out of it is, you just have to be like curious about the world around you. And like, you'll get more out of life, certainly, if you're curious about the world around you, but certainly, watches can be very rewarding if you just keep asking questions and finding those like rabbit holes to fall down.
Yeah. 4,404,800 minutes. That's how long Sternglass has been delivering value-packed Bauhaus-style watches for 8 years. To celebrate this milestone, they are embracing a more is more approach instead of their traditional less is more. The Marion 200-meter dive watch is quite colorful and, by Sternglass standards, a busy watch. However, it features clear, legible lines and is very functional. With its vibrant dial and rotating bezel options, as well as its substantial bracelet, they have listened to the community and created a functional tool that can endure the challenges of the open sea. At 41 millimeters in diameter and powered by the reliable Seiko NH35 movement, it is ready for any adventure. Visit Sternglass.com to explore various combinations and receive a free Tropic-style rubber strap with your purchase. The Sternglass Marion is available now for $749 at the Sternglass shop at Sternglass.com.
So Meg, you live in Colorado. What part of Colorado are you in?
I'm in the Boulder area.
Okay.
Yeah, so, right at the base of the mountains.
Yeah. So I met you a few years ago at a Vortic kind of like press activation where RT was showing off the RT Custer, the founder of Vortic, was showing off his manufacturing facilities ahead of the launch of Colorado Watch Company, and so we connected and then met there. But I wanted to ask you specifically about like living in Colorado and how that informs your watch enthusiasm, because like I see you on Instagram, like you're always like we have a great Instagram account. We'll
thank you.
Of course, you're always posting these great like photos of kind of like the beautiful Colorado landscape, and like that factors into your watch life pretty heavily. I would imagine.
Absolutely, yeah. I feel like Colorado is such an interesting place for a lot of hobbies, but for watches specifically, I think so many people are drawn to this like adventure lifestyle. I think if you're choosing to live in Colorado as an adult, that kind of appeals to you in some capacity. And so I think with me, when I'm choosing watches, it's always with the intention of like, where can I bring this? And the answer kind of needs to be everywhere.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of informs like, I love field watches. I love watches with like decent water resistance. Watches that are, I'm not going to be heartbroken if I bang them up a little bit or I scratch them, like, because I'm using them to go do things. And so I think, just for me, it is kind of that more like robust sort of like lifestyle. And I've kind of found that in community too, when I go to like Red Bar Denver events. Of course, there's a variety of watches present, but for the most part, it's like people are not babying these, and they are kind of getting out there with them and doing the cool things, getting the cool photo, and just having those conversations. But yeah, so yeah, I remember, Zach, that was, I think like a year ago last month, that was in Fort Collins. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And I just started the Instagram like not too long before that. And
oh my gosh.
yeah. And RT reached out to me and he's like, hey, I know you're in Colorado and we're in Fort Collins. Do you want to come check this out? And I was like, sure. Had no idea what I was doing. And, but it was great to go and have those conversations and be like, wow, there's like, I mean, I listened to Warner Wound for like years before that. But I'm like, there's like a community around this. And like, this is something that I could do like potentially as a career, you know?
Yeah.
And so I think that kind of opened my eyes to it, that this wasn't just like a hobby, like this was kind of like a lifestyle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was a really fun trip. I remember seeing the prototypes at that point of the Colorado Watch Company watches, and they're finished now. Like he's got like production versions of those watches. We saw them. Kat, did you see it at Wind Up? They look great. Like honestly, like they're like just very impressive pieces. But yeah, that was a really fun press trip. I enjoy like the sort of like casual approach that RT takes to those things.
Yeah. And that's quintessential Colorado. Like I which I love. Like, I'm like, I think it just invites so many more people into the hobby. And I remember like my first Red Bar event, I was so nervous and, I'm like, I think it's nerve wracking. Like when you're not the typical audience, you know, like walking into any event. So I'm like, oh, I'm kind of young. Like I'm a woman. And, that feels like I'm sure
that
you know,
alone
like
is pretty intimidating.
Exactly. Yeah. And so I was like, what if I say something that is wrong and people judge me? And I just had all these thoughts kind of going in, but, every experience, like every conversation, people were so welcoming and everything's so casual. Like I think that to me is, I love doing watches in Colorado specifically.
Yeah.
I think
the state lends itself. And certainly if I lived in Colorado, I would be the same. I would have a collection that was a little bit more sports watch leaning or field watch leaning. Cause I think that's like what fits in there. And I think what's so cool about Colorado, which I kind of call it my second home. I grew up going to Colorado, to Beulah. I had a stepmother, who had family there and we would go, 2 or 3 times a year. And, it's like the one state that if me and my husband leave Nashville, like that's where we would go. We love Colorado.
Come on over.
But it's great because you guys have like literally you go to certain areas of the state, it's like the desert, and then you go to certain areas and it's the forest, and then you get the snow, and you can be in Colorado in July in the middle of summer, and then go up to Pikes Peak and there's snow up there. Like there's so crazy and cool, and it's just an awesome state. There's so much to do, and it is very like everyone there. You feel like everyone appreciates the outdoors more than any other state. I feel like there's like just this overall appreciation. People want to be outside as much as possible. You see, 80-year-olds riding their bikes, and it's I feel like I would be healthier if I lived there, honestly. I don't know. We should look and see if Colorado has more healthy people than other states. Certainly more than Tennessee.
I think that is true, actually.
Definitely.
I think Boulder specifically is consistently ranked the #1 healthiest city.
Yeah. See, people just they take care of themselves, and they just I don't know, they probably meditate in nature and go for walks every day. And I think just emotionally and mental health wise, they probably are a little healthier. But
that's the exact opposite of New England. I just want to say,
I was just thinking, just like New Hampshire, right, Zach?
Yeah, this is the most. I mean, New Hampshire obviously has a great tradition of outdoor.
Yeah, you guys are
in the White Mountains.
Yeah, but this is a very stressed out part of the country all the time. I don't really quite understand why, but it's that's sort of how I classify my New England neighbors and I.
That's funny. But Meg, I see your Instagram, and I'm always so jealous, first of all, because you go on these epic trips, and I see that you're posting that you're okay, I have to ask, you're in an abandoned, are you by yourself when you're in an abandoned warehouse in the middle of nowhere? Or are you just going by yourself?
I'm usually with a friend. Sometimes
I
was by myself.
I hope that she's not alone.
Yeah. So the Route 66 trip, I think that really pushed me and my friend out of our comfort zones a little bit. And I think I'm a little more curious about the abandoned stuff than he is. So he's usually in the car, ready to drive away.
Yeah.
And I'm exploring and, have my camera with me. And but I think just having grown up here, it's I live so close to the mountains. There's a bunch of abandoned, miners' cabins and everything that kind of dot, the landscape. And, even just as a kid, in high school, when I got my license, I would just kind of drive. And if I found something, I would just stumble into it. And, but it's funny because I'm I don't compared to other people I know that live here, I'm not adventurous. And so it's,
really?
I love that I can like share that part of myself with Instagram and like with the Warner Wound community. And I've had people like reach out being like, oh, you inspired me to go to like a national park. And like, I love hearing that. Yeah. And I think for me, it's like, I grew up in Colorado. I've lived here, you know, pretty much my whole life. But it's just now in my 20s that I'm really prioritizing like actually getting out and exploring because there's so much around here. And you're right, like within 4 hours, I can be in the literal desert. And then in an hour, I can be in like a ski town. And it just, to me, I'm like, it feels like a shame if I don't go out and actually do that. And so part of the watch thing is like, I'm going out and I'm like getting these shots for people that are like, you know, I've never been to Colorado. What's the landscape like? Or
depends where you go.
Like, exactly. Yeah. Depends which part of the state you go. But they're almost like living vicariously through me, which I love. So I'm like, I really want to get out there and like do those cool things. To kind of share those too.
Not watch related, but I have to ask, have you ever been to Estes Park?
Oh yeah. I live like 45 minutes south of Estes. So I go all the time.
That's awesome. So me and Zach are recording tomorrow, time on screen about The Shining, and the Stanley Hotel is there. I've stayed there. Yeah.
Gosh.
Pretty cool.
So fun story. I was supposed to stay there overnight for my 21st birthday. I love like haunted stuff.
Same. I do too.
Yes. I'm like haunted history is my favorite. But yeah, I was supposed to stay there and we had like a freak, like late April blizzard that rolled through. And I was like, I don't really want to be like reliving The Shining, like stranded in this, like the Stanley Hotel. So I ended up staying at a hotel in Denver that also is supposedly haunted. But yeah, love that. They do a really fun tour as well. They do like a Shining ghost tour. So.
It's awesome. Yeah, it's such a fun hotel. I always recommend people to stay there. And my one regret is that when we stayed, they asked us at the front desk if we wanted a room that had some paranormal stuff that has happened, or if we just wanted like, there's a new wing that like is fine, that's like brand new. And we chose to stay in the new side. And I was like, oh man, I should have stayed. Like at the time I was like slightly freaked out that something might happen. And I changed my mind last minute, but yeah, I have to go back and try to stay in a weird room.
Adjacent. So I think
was
it's
close.
Like,
we were neighbors essentially. Yeah.
No, that's so cool. Yeah.
I really need to do that, like stay at the Shining hotel at some point, because that's a movie, and we'll talk about this when we record, Cap, but like that's a movie. I don't want to like spoil the podcast, but like that's a movie I've seen so many times. It just kind of like lives in my brain. Yeah. And I just have so many thoughts about it. It's so different than obviously what the movie shows, because it was filmed in a different place, but some parts actually were filmed there, and it's such a spooky, eerie, and there's like other stories. And again, we'll talk about this on our official podcast.
I'm so excited about
other
this.
movies.
I love The Shining.
If all goes according to plan, it'll drop on Halloween, which is the day after this podcast drops. So a little preview of
just listen to this one and then immediately go listen the next day to Time on Screen,
and then fly to Estes Park, and then
exactly, and then you can just pop right into the national park. It's right there. And you can
get stranded there in the snow, because there's probably snow there. I would imagine like very soon, if not already.
Yeah, very soon. I went to Breckenridge yesterday. I was hiking and there was snow. So I'm sure Estes Park has snow,
which I can imagine, Meg, that like we don't deal with much snow here. Like we might get like a few inches and then it's gone in like a day here in Tennessee. But I can imagine you guys dealing with so much snow, and like, I don't know, I would figure that the visibility and readability of your watch would come into play. Does that matter at all to you? I'm sure do you look for like darker dials that have a little bit more contrast when you're like out in the snow?
Yeah. So I don't really love the snow. So that's kind of the one season I'm like, oh man.
Good thing you live in Colorado.
I know. I'm just here for the summer. But yeah, the winter, I'm like, my goal for this winter is to actually get out and like do some winter sports. Cause it is a shame. I'm like, I do so much in the summer when the weather's nice, in the fall. Yeah. And then my like outdoorsiness kind of decreases in the winter. So I've never actively thought about the snow in relation to a watch. Yeah. But I think for me that it could kind of factor into like, if I did want to snowshoe or like, put on micro spikes and go hiking somewhere, having a darker dial, I think would help. But also just that water resistance, I think is going to be key, where I'm like, if I'm doing something crazy, I just don't want to like worry about condensation under the
well, yeah.
crystal
And
or
like if
anything.
you're out there, like, snowmobiling, or even if you're like skiing or snowboarding, like you get, so like that's why everything you wear is basically waterproof from your boots to your like hat, and I can imagine that whatever you're wearing is just going to get drenched in water at some point from being in the snow.
Yep.
I think about we get a lot of snow in New Hampshire too.
You do.
What we really deal with a lot, what I deal with a lot, because I walk around in my neighborhood, downtown in Concord a lot, is ice. So I'm always thinking about like the robustness of a watch when I inevitably like slip on the ice and the watch, which is like, as I've discussed on this podcast before, like I will slip on the ice like once a year. Like I'll take a digger and like something will. So like that's something I'm always thinking about in the wintertime is I want to wear like my most robust watches in the winter. So the dress watches, I do kind of like lean more towards like the dressy stuff, I guess these days. And like those kind of get like put away. And I wear a lot of like more robust sports watches.
You just got to do NATO straps, no steel bracelets in the winter. We just, I'm like, if you fall, And I also, it's icy here too. So,
Yeah. I hate the winter. Like this is another like kind of like stereotypical kind of like New Englander thing, but like we always like, we complain about like the thing that kind of makes our
harsh winters
region. I hate it. And like I could really
come to Tennessee and visit Nashville during the winter, because it's like, I don't know, Christmas time, it could be 20 degrees with snow, or it could be 75 degrees and sunny. And it's really, lately it's been pretty warm. Probably global warming, I would assume. But
the thing I enjoy, Kat,
I'm enjoying it.
The thing I enjoy, Kat, about your part of the country is you get that one snowstorm and everyone freaks out, and it's like it is all we post about
deal for a week.
It's that's always fun. I enjoy that.
One snowstorm a season is enough.
We don't know what to do. I have like 2 of the 3 of our vehicles are trucks, 4-wheel drive. Ready, can do anything, and I still don't get out, like because I don't know how to drive. And to be fair, like we get a mixture of ice and snow, and I find that driving in snow is a lot easier than driving like in ice. More unpredictable. And my driveway literally just goes down, and so we try not to go anywhere and stay in.
I think for me, it's like the snow with the watches. I've never really thought about that, but with the winter, I do think about cars. That's like the number one thing is like investing in a really reliable car that has good 4-wheel drive. So
everybody does. Like everyone in Colorado is driving.
Well,
like,
everyone should.
They should. I guess they don't. But I see a lot of like Jeeps and Broncos and trucks, Subarus that are 4-wheel drive. It seems like that's sort of a very popular vehicle over there, just because it's kind of all-wheel drive, get you anywhere. Although your car, Zach, is all-wheel drive too.
Right? My car is all-wheel drive, and I'm an excellent bad weather driver. This is one of the things I really pride myself on.
Oh, really?
I'm a very good snow and ice driver. It's a skill I've picked up over many years of kind of like white knuckling it here. I feel very confident in those conditions. Meg, I'm thinking back to your Route 66 piece, and you're like the piece kind of closes with like a pretty dramatic sort of like the bad weather driving experience. You want to take us through that?
Yeah, I was just reflecting on that actually with my friend Gabe, who is in that article. We did this trip together. This was like early April, and we had to cross through the mountains to get back home. And the whole trip, I think, was like 5 or 6 days. And when I started writing this article, I really wanted to keep it very like Route 66 specific. But I'm like, no, like as I kept like trying to write it, I'm like, this blizzard was this like crazy adventurous experience. It was kind of like the exclamation point at the end of the trip. So I'm like, it has to be in there. But yeah, we were coming home after this like wild Route 66 adventure, and we were crossing through the Rockies. And our winters are like fairly mild, but they are long. And so like it can snow, I would say, from like mid-October all the way through early May. So any that's fair game, especially in the mountains. And so that first day when we were coming home, we started off at Mesa Verde National Park. And that was great. That was my first time seeing that. Highly recommend. And then our trip was a little bit delayed because I got a speeding ticket. And that was the first one ever. And Zach told me to put in an article, so I did. But that delayed us a little bit. So we were getting home like later than we both had expected. And we ended up hitting the Rockies like at nighttime. And we'd been driving like parallel to these storm clouds the whole trip. And I'm like, I just know that those are going to hit as soon as we have to like be in the mountains. And then sure enough,
oh no,
massive blizzard, and we were in a really capable car. But yeah, just complete whiteout, couldn't see anything. We were like following a Bronco, and then they gave up. And so,
oh no, that's not good.
No, I was like, when the Broncos are giving up, it's just time to like, everyone needs to be done at that point. But yeah, so we ended up, thank God for GPS, because I pulled up a map and I could see that we were coming up on like a turnoff. And so we pulled over, and I don't think I've ever been that afraid on any of my like outings. I think that was, for me, I'm like, if you can't see and there's ice, it's not a good time anymore. So yeah.
That can be truly terrible. Like I've also had that experience of driving in like really bad weather and seeing other cars kind of like bail out and like decide like to just wait. And like, that's when you get that like sinking feeling, like, knowing that like, oh man, if I keep going, I'm really like, pressing my luck because everyone else is deciding to.
Right. And I think like there's so like you can invest in great gear. You can have great tires. For me, and I'm like, I recommend this to any Coloradan or anyone that lives where there's winter, like have supplies in your car so that if you did have to pull over, like you can wait out a couple hours, like have water and food and a blanket and everything. But I'm like, if it's not in your control anymore, like I think that's when it's not fun.
Yeah. So, I always think about like the other driver, coming in the opposite direction or whatever. Yeah. Like, doesn't have like snow tires or whatever.
Oh yeah. And you just never know, especially it's like at that time it was early April. So a lot of people were like, oh, I'll take my winter tires off, but scary. And I think also too, it's like we were passing all these signs that were like truckers, another 7 miles of steep incline. And you're just like, that's not what I want to know right now.
Yeah. So that's like the worst.
There's like a sheer cliff, like you are just tumbling off the Rocky Mountains if that guardrail breaks or something.
That is very scary.
Yeah, it was truly an adventure right to the end. But that trip was just incredible. And I think, I just, like I mentioned before, just as a kid growing up, I was always fascinated by these like abandoned places and like, why are they abandoned? Like what were the stories behind them? And that trip was like so many condensed, abilities to do that, where it's like every couple of towns has been abandoned. And, I think it was really cool to kind of see it in the full context. And also see like multiple states too. Cause I did New Mexico and Arizona, and just kind of seeing the changes. And then like, Flagstaff, for example, I stayed there for a couple of days and that's like a bustling city, because that's where the new interstate was put in. And you kind of see this tale of like, the people go to the interstate, and if the interstate bypasses your town's probably not going to survive. But we see that again, like with, like trains as well, like the invention of trains way back, like that, if the train bypassed your town, you needed to move because your business was going to fail. So I think it was interesting to kind of see this throughout history. It felt bigger than just Route 66 to me.
Yeah. It's cool.
The Route 66 piece, honestly, is like one of my favorite pieces that we've had on the website like this year.
Wow, thank you.
It's really great. We'll link to it in the show notes, of course. If you're listening and you haven't read it, like definitely go check it out. It's wonderful. And great photography too, I have to say. Like
thanks. Wow, that means so much. Thank you so much.
Like just a lot of just like very evocative images of these as we've been talking about, these abandoned places that are just like
ghost
just adds
towns,
like so much kind of like context to the pieces. It's really, really well done.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. Yeah, I love that you liked the photography, because I don't consider myself a photographer. I definitely am like writer first, photo second. So but I think there was something where I'm like, I want to get this right enough where the reader feels what I'm feeling.
No, absolutely. And you did. You definitely accomplished that.
Thanks. 100%. Wow. Thank you so much. Yeah. We'll see. I'm like, I'm not quite into cameras yet, but if it does the job, I know. I'm like, there's
another rabbit hole. It's one of the
yeah. But yeah, I'm like, if I can take a photo that conveys the story, that's good enough for me. So for now, yeah.
Another piece that you wrote just recently for Worn and Wound is kind of more on like the sort of like the gear and like experience adventure side. You wrote about the Overlanding Expo that you attended a few months back. Can you take us through that and what like kind of what that experience meant to you, and maybe for folks who aren't like familiar with what overlanding is, like maybe just sort of like explain quickly, like like what is overlanding to a novice?
Yeah. So overlanding, and I think there is some nuance to like the definition, but from my understanding, overlanding is when you have a vehicle that is capable of traversing like over pretty much any type of terrain, and you take these trips out into like the backcountry, and it's usually just you and your gear, and your rig, your like car. So yeah, this Overland Expo happens in multiple cities throughout the summer and the fall. And so I posted in this watch chat that I'm a part of, and I was like, oh, I like the watches because I get out on a hike and I do the fun adventure stuff. But I also just bought a Bronco Sport because I want to start getting out into like off-roading and things like that.
Yeah.
And this person commented and he's like, hey, I'm not in your area, but I'm really into off-roading. And I know that there's this like convention that's happening. Look into it. It's called the Overland Expo. And so I searched it and it was happening literally like the next week. So it was perfect timing. And it was in Loveland, which is like 40 minutes north of me, I would say. It's just south of like Fort Collins. And so I just went by myself and just kind of got to experience it. I took like all these classes. The whole thing is kind of like a big field, and there's like one standalone building and then a bunch of like pop-up tents. Yeah. And so each pop-up tent has a theme. And so like one of the themes was like classes for social media influencers. So you could learn more about like the legality behind overlanding or posting content, or like advocating for yourself. There was another one, and I was mostly in this tent like for most of the day. It was called Women Who Wander. And all the classes were focused on women getting into off-roading or camping, especially those that were doing it alone. Yeah. And so for me, I'm like, this was incredible. I met so many cool women that like have been doing this for years. And then like young women trying to kind of get into this. And awesome. And I was like this, I learned a lot. I got to see a ton of cool cars. My car was like a little baby compared to all these other cars, but yeah. And it just kind of like I think for me, I have such an interest in gear and like being ready and like prepared for things. And I think for me, the car, I was like, this opens up, like, this is like the key that is unlocking the next level of Colorado for me, where I'm like able to get out and like, I don't need like a road anymore, like I can go somewhere else. And and I've also been someone that's very much into like women's self-defense. And so like growing up, like in college and stuff, I got really into like martial arts. And I think it was cool to kind of bond with women where it's like, we don't want to be afraid to go out and do the things that we want to do. So like, how can we get to a point where we aren't afraid and we can kind of go out and do that? And so I was kind of in like a similar minded community. And it was cool to hear experiences. And a lot of them, I think paralleled how I feel women sometimes experience the watch world, where I'm like, it can be a little intimidating if I'm being honest. Like I mentioned before, like if you're not the typical demographic, walking into this room, I think people, you have to be a little more prepared sometimes to defend your position on things. But for the most part, I'm like, people are really welcoming. And that's what I've noticed with overlanding and off-roading as well. I really there's a whole other world out there, that I think is cool.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh, I've just spent so much money on, I bought a 4Runner like,
oh my gosh, yes.
I've already spent way too much money on just camping gear. I'm going camping in like a couple of weeks, and same as you. I just love gear so much and things, and just building out this kit that's just it's extra. It's so extra, but it's gonna be.
But it looks so cool.
Yeah,
it's for me, like if the things I'm buying, if this saves my life one time, this is worth it. Like it's worth it to have a backup.
Yeah. And I'm always like of the rule of like, not that I don't tend to buy super cheap, but then I also don't buy the most expensive thing. I want to like the most use of my money, and also like I want to buy something once and not have to buy it again. So like, yeah, it's costly. Yeah,
Yes.
it's costly.
Yes, I feel that for sure.
Along with watches, it's really hard.
All the fun hobbies are expensive. Like you just have to kind of like accept that at that.
And you don't have to spend a lot. I will say, like, there's so many great in Meg. I'm sure you've dove into the rabbit hole of YouTube videos on overlanding, because I watch them all weekend. Like I'll just sit there on the couch watching video after video of people who do it on like the expensive side and people that do it on the cheap. And like you can, cut corners and do things really cheaply. And, I think it's a hobby for anyone that has a vehicle that obviously can 4-wheel drive and get to some of these cool roads and things like that. And we've done it once when I had the Subaru. Me and my husband went on like a 2-week trip out all the way from Tennessee to San Francisco and back. And then we kind of came back actually through Colorado and came back home down that way. And yeah, we like, you pull over on like a fire road that no one really goes down, and you just park and camp for the night. And it's so cool just to be able, like, you don't even have to like, there's camping and there's going to like a national park and doing the whole campsite thing. And then there's just like literally parking on the side of the road somewhere. And it's like, yep, this is my spot. This is where we're going to stay for the night. And it's so fun. It's like, oh wait, am I allowed to do this? Like, it feels weird at first. So you're just
yeah. And I haven't actually. So I do camp, but it's like always in a tent. And so far, like, I mean, I just got the Bronco this summer, but like so far I haven't gone out and actually done it. So I'm excited to actually go out and like and do that.
Build that Bronco up. Are you going to do like rooftop tent, or are you going to try to sleep inside? I
think I'm going to try and sleep inside. I might build like a platform on the inside. The rooftop tent is amazing, but I'm also like, that's expensive. So
they're expensive. And I will say, like, we had one for a while and they look really cool, but getting up and down that little tiny ladder in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom sucks big time. And I'm doing the same thing. I'm sleeping inside the vehicle, but then having like a little tent as like a station to put all the stuff in right beside me. But then sleeping inside also kind of gives me the comfort of, I'm not totally in bear country, but there are bears in the Smoky Mountains. So
yes, I
feel a little bit more safe being inside the vehicle.
Agreed. Yeah. My first ever time camping in a tent. I didn't have a visual, so this could be like, I don't know. I am 95% sure there was a bear in my campsite.
Oh no.
So ever since then, I still camp, but I'm like, I always think about that. So I'm like, if I could be inside the car, I think it would just be a level of like,
and y'all have I'm not gonna say real bears. So y'all have like, we have little black bears that are, you don't? Okay.
No, we don't have grizzlies. So, Wyoming has grizzlies. They're the state above us.
Gotcha.
So that is peace of mind. I'm like, I could probably like this bear could be scared off potentially. But I just don't want to be in the position of having to scare them away. So I'm like, I'd rather just not interact with the bear at all. So,
words to live by.
Exactly.
Don't interact with the bear.
Meg's travel tip, just don't interact with the bears. But no, I think with, this new hobby, I'm like, oh man, and I'm like into it now. I just was in Moab, last weekend which if anyone has a Bronco, you should know about this, cause I didn't, and I'm happy I did it. They do a Bronco off rodeo. Oh, wow. And you actually get to go out, and they have a Bronco Sport one and then like a big Bronco one. And so I did the Bronco Sport one. It's a full day and it's free if you have purchased the vehicle within like the past 2 years. And you just go out behind like Arches National Park and you learn the capabilities of the vehicle. You learn like off-roading techniques, how to pick lines. And if you have like a buddy with you, like how to use like hand signals and stuff, if one of you's out of the car, like guiding. And so to me, I'm like, that was like exactly what I wanted to do. And so with the expo, I was like, I got to get into this. And so
that's so cool.
Yeah. So did the expo, then did the off rodeo, and it's incredible. And just the people in the community like are just great as well. And there's also some watch people in, I would say, the overlanding community too.
Definitely. I would imagine there's quite a bit of crossover. I would think, because it covers especially in Colorado, I would think there's like, you've got the outdoor stuff, the overlanding, the watches, like it all seems like it's part of the same soup,
Yes, kind of. Agreed.
So do you have overlanding plans for the winter, or will that be more of like a spring, summer?
No, I think that'll be, so my plan right now is I just got the approval to put a lift in the car. I think that's going to help a little bit, just give it like a little more ground clearance. So I'll do that. Got to get some better tires, I think, as well. I still have the stock tires. yeah, no plans right now. So far I used it for like day trips, and for some of those like photos I put on Instagram when I was in Moab, I did have to use my car to off-road to get there. And like some of those like abandoned things I was, exploring was all, off-road. But yeah, we'll see. Maybe a larger trip is in the works, but
yeah,
nothing right now.
Future out of office feature in Worn and Wound, I think.
Yeah, for sure.
Like there's a lot of potential there. That's very exciting. So Meg, this has been great. I feel like I could talk to you for hours about like all the kind of like cool outdoor experiences and all the things that you're doing in Colorado. Any sort of like immediate plans on like what comes next, like any like writing projects in the works or watches that you're interested in? Like what's what has your interest like at the moment?
Yeah, that's
kind of heading into the
question.
Colder weather, I guess, in a different climate.
Yes. So I think right now, so no watches on deck right now. I think right now I'm like kind of full speed ahead with the car stuff.
Yeah.
So I think doing the mods to the car, that's for sure high on my list. But no, I think for me, just writing for Worn and Wound, I think it's like a year. I started a year ago. I started doing that. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Congrats.
Thanks. Yeah. Happy first birthday. Happy first Worn and Wound birthday to me. But I think for me, it's like the travelogue writing has really captured my heart. I still love the reviews. I think like still, bringing the watch, like bringing the Oris to Route 66, that was super cool. Or like the Hamilton trip I did, getting that expedition and getting to do all those fun adventures with the Hamilton, Khaki Field expedition. But yeah, for me, I'm like, it's really about the travelogue. I think EDC would be amazing to get into as well. Yeah. I just have like such an interest in gear and, just like preparedness overall. And I think that kind of relates to the watch world. There's some definite overlap there. But yeah, and I'd love to start doing some more video content. I think, I think Instagram is a great like outlet. And I don't know what it is. Like, I think I'm very introverted by nature. And so the idea of like doing more of like a video, I think seems challenging, but also, I feel like it'll kind of let me connect to people a little bit. More deeply than I have been so far. So, so we'll see.
Well,
that's awesome.
It's great. I love that you've kind of like found a niche or like an area of writing that you really enjoy with this sort of like travelogue writing. Cause I think like you have a lifestyle that like really like lends itself to it. And you have all these like cool experiences. I'm so glad you're, willing to share those with our readers. I have the experience of kind of like seeing these like emails come in from you and from other writers, like telling me about like the cool experiences that they're going to have. And I always kind of feel bad about like asking, well, you can like write about it for Worn and Wound. Like if you want, I hate the idea of like turning like a vacation into like an assignment, but it sounds like you really enjoy like the writing piece of it, which is awesome for all of us.
Thank you. I think for me, it adds a different perspective to kind of put it on paper and sit down and actually put the experience to words. And so I think it's like a beneficial thing for me. And now it's like I have that Route 66 piece on the site, and like that is kind of this memoir of this experience I had with, one of my best friends. And so, I think it's been really interesting for me to have that experience as well, like from the writing perspective.
Yeah,
totally.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that with us, Meg, and for all the work you've done with Worn and Wound. I know there's a lot more to come. I'm sure you'll continue to have these experiences and continue to kind of chronicle them for us. I'm very excited for that, and
definitely.
I'm so glad we were finally able to get you on the podcast. This has been a blast. It's really
I know the schedule's finally matched up. Thank you so much.
I know. I've been like anxiously waiting for a while now.
No, it's been so great to chat. Like I said, I love the podcast, and the community is amazing. So thank you both for this experience, and the experience for, of getting to write for Worn and Wound. It's been incredible.
It's been our pleasure. Thank you, Meg. Thank you, Kat. And thank you to all of our listeners for tuning in this week. As we mentioned, we'll have a time on screen tomorrow, which we have yet to record, which makes me nervous to say that it's tomorrow, but we'll record it and get it
TBD.
Together. And obviously more episodes of the podcast week to week to come. Thank you all for tuning in, and we will see you next time.